All right, welcome everybody. Everybody's trickling in here. All right, so welcome to the final installment of Porta Sophia's information sessions about the Archival Researcher Network. Thank you for being here. It's been great to see this sort of turnout that we've had and all the interest that we've had afterwards and follow-ups and that kind of thing. I'm Amanda Pratt, and I'm part of the data team at our Psychedelic Prior Art Library. Today's information session is focused on psychedelic archival research with Lucas Rickert. So I'll introduce him and talk a little bit more about that shortly here. Just some basic Zoom etiquette. Keep your mic muted. It should have automatically muted when you came in. Cece will be moderating the chat, and as will I. And so feel free to add questions there, but we'll circle back to a Q&A at the end of the session. We'll answer logistical things as they come up. And so, yeah, just a brief overview of our information sessions, all of which have been really geared again at the potential participants in our new initiative, the Archival Researcher Network. We started out a couple of weeks ago with a primer on patent law and prior art with David Casimir and Thomas Eisenberger. If you want to go to the next slide, Cece. Oh, yep, perfect. Which really kind of hopefully set the context for why our psychedelic prior art library is important and necessary to make the patent landscape of psychedelics as ethical as possible. And then our second session last week really focused on the data team's processes and how we see the Archival Researcher Network as fitting into our workflow, specifically to make our library more inclusive of key archival sources in the history of psychedelics. And then our last info session that we had a week ago from today was with Dr. Charles Raison, who kind of gave the least you should know about psychedelic science if you're going to be involved with what we're up to. And so all 4 sessions are being recorded, including this one, and they will be available to watch afterward via our Porta Sophia YouTube channel, as well as on our ARN landing page. So I've also been sending out follow-up emails to registrants with suggested readings and pertinent announcements. And there's a link, I made a bit.ly link for our YouTube page. I think just the first one is up already, and then the last 3 will be up soon. So our bit.ly link is bit.ly/YT Porta Sophia for our YouTube channel. And then I also just wanted to briefly share our timeline at a glance before we get started to give you a sense of where we're headed. So this should be familiar to lots of you who have been attending already, but we have our first kind of due date coming up on February 28th, where our RSVP form is due. And with that, you'll be able to show interest in the Archival Researcher Network and our kickoff event. And then we're kind of moving towards our kickoff event on June 1st through the 3rd, beginning on the 1st with a workshop on psychedelic archival research with Stephanie Schmitz, who is the Betsy Gordon Archivist for Psychoactive Substances Research at Purdue University Libraries. And we'll also have a variety of programming on June 2nd and 3rd, spotlight talks on archival prior art, maybe presented by some of you, keynote presentations and roundtables. And again, happy to answer questions about any of this logistical stuff in the chat. And without further ado, I'm going to read Luke's bio, and then we'll kind of jump into today's material. So Lucas Rickert is the George Erding Chair in the History of Pharmacy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He is also the Historical Director of the American Institute of the History of Pharmacy. His recent publications include Cannabis, Global Histories from the MIT Press in 2021, and Break On Through Radical Psychiatry and the American Counterculture, again from MIT Press in 2019. So today, Luke will present on what it means to do psychedelic archival research. And so if you're one of those folks I've been kind of speaking about over the last few sessions who maybe have a good handle on the history of psychedelics, but don't necessarily have that expertise in what it means to do archival research, this is for you. And we'll be sharing also a bit about the state of archival sources that are currently in our psychedelic prior art library, which will hopefully be cool for you to see too. And so, yeah, we're here in a way to kind of shed light on that archival side of the Archival Researcher Network. And the first question or prompt that I have for Luke is really very basic, and that is, what is archival research?
Well, okay. Thanks for inviting me, Amanda, to talk to you. And I appreciate that actually there are archivists and librarians in the room here. And so I'm going to just throw out a couple of caveats that, I am not a trained archivist. I'm not a librarian who went to an information school. So if I get any of my terminology or nomenclature wrong, so hopefully I'll be corrected. But when it comes to what is an archive, I mean, I want to just answer your question, Amanda, about basically at the fundamental level. So I thought I'd go to experts. So I went to my kids, first of all. I asked my kids last night, so what is an archive? My 12-year-old kid said it's a big dark place with lots of shelves and books. And then my 8-year-old kid said it's a room with drugs and sometimes rats. And so we talked a little bit about that, about her perception of archives, and it's kind of not what it is. It's not. It's kind of the opposite of that. Um, so an archive and archival research is way more complicated than that. So archival research is research that involves extracting, first of all, searching for and then extracting information and evidence from repositories. There's also the idea of, inputting, accessioning these non-archived materials, but I'm not going to touch that at all. So um, there are all sorts of different types of archives in the United States and around the world. They exist to preserve historic material and then make it available for future use, right? So I think we probably all get that. So they hold materials that are of value, historical documents. These can be records or other sources relating to individuals, to entities, to various objects, all of the above. This information that's held in different archives then provides valuable information that is used by a whole cross-section of populations and demographics. So just a few examples: genealogists, journalists, those in the legal profession, and so you have a variety of different people who draw on this information that's held in these archival repositories. So the sources for that are from obviously my kids, and then also from LexisNexis. You can check out LexisNexis if you want a little bit of information about that. So that's it in a nutshell, Amanda. And you're on mute.
Thank you. So now that we have the kind of what is archival research, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the how and what it's kind of like to be an archival researcher. How does it work? What do you actually do? That kind of thing.
Sure. Well, you've done it. You've done it yourself.
I sure have.
Yeah, I'm sure
I'll
you
talk
had a
about that a
blast.
little later.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so what is it like to be an archival researcher? Well, you're hunting, you're sifting, you're sorting, you're synthesizing, you're reading deeply, you're having curiosity, you're having patience. Kind of depends, the answer that I'm giving kind of depends on the place that you go and how they have inventoried, cataloged the material that they have. So sometimes there are descriptions of the materials in the given archive going all the way down to the folder level, so you can really see what's in a given folder, and so it's very particular. And other times you're going into a place where there isn't that sort of granular amount of information about what's in a given box or even in a given folder. So it kind of depends on the place that you're at. As an archival researcher, it's going to be key to triangulate different sources. And I think you're going to say a bit more about that, Amanda. So you're going to have patents, you're going to have keywords, you're going to have targets. So you'll talk about that, but it's going to be important as part of this network, if you choose to be involved, is to think a little bit like a detective, which is fun, and then also be able to connect dots between different sources. So Let me just tell you how I've sort of worked through what's happening right now. So if you can share the slides, Cece, I want to give you sort of a tangible example of sort of my thought process with MindMed, which has announced a mescaline study. So the idea here is that this company has announced that it's going to engage in phase 1 clinical trials evaluating acute effects of mescaline with varying doses. So this is me being a little bit proactive and thinking about what we might have in my own collections, which are readily available to me. And so if you can just advance the slide. I went downstairs. Luckily, I can just go downstairs into the collections that I have below me, below my office, and just sort of sifted through. I immediately found an image about mescal buttons, and then you can just go to the next slide. I found some other documents. This is from the Therapeutic Gazette in 1888, talking about the use of mescal buttons. And so this comes from this popular periodical that communicates medical information to pharmacists, to doctors. And the title of this is a study of the drug with a special reference to its physiological action upon man with report of experiments. So in thinking about this new study that MindMed is launching, I just wanted to go back and see what was there in 1888. And then you can skip forward one slide. And then I wanted to see what was published slightly more recently. So instead of 1888, I looked at this article from 1968. And this article, 1968, was written by a pharmacist named George Bender, published it in the Journal of the History of Medicine, Allied Sciences. And in writing this historical article, he's drawing on this correspondence that we have downstairs in the collections that I oversee. And in this correspondence, they're talking about the sourcing of the materials. They're talking about different dosage forms, polysubstance use here. So that was just sort of my thought process in being a bit of a detective when I saw that this study was being launched. And so that's my answer to your question, Amanda.
Great. So thank you, Luke. So I just want to give a quick sense of the, just like kind of at a glance, what we have currently on the Porta Sophia library. If you want to go to the next slide, Cece. And so we have about, when we started Porta Sophia as a project, our initial push of sources that were in our database that can be searched, we had about 25 archival sources there. And something to note is like, this is a huge, huge selling point for Porta Sophia because of the fact that these archival sources are not easily surfaced on your typical Google search, databases that patent examiners typically use, that kind of thing, right? So these are all sources that were really surfaced by Luke and some other colleagues in Porta Sophia. And so just to give a sense, I'll show you some screenshots from our website in just a moment. Oh, stay on that side, sorry. But yeah, so we have two different search functions currently on our website. We have a global search and a targeted search. And I'll show you what that looks like. On the horizon, we are merging those search tools. So that's just something that is coming down the road. But currently in the global search, we have a checkbox where you could check off your search to be an archival source. And then in the targeted search is where you'll see our curated references. And that's where the real value of a lot of this archival research really is, right? Because part of the, one of the questions that comes up all the time when talking about Porta Sophia and archival sources is this idea of digitization, right? And so a lot of people want to know, well, why can't you just digitize all these archives so that they can be searched? And that's a good question. And as an outcome, like there are a variety of reasons why either that's not possible or not feasible. So digitization is a super labor intensive process, and it's sometimes because of that very cost prohibitive. Also, a lot of the material that is in archives has various issues that it cannot be reproduced either digitally or it cannot be reproduced on a website like Porta Sophia is. So copyright can be an issue. Oftentimes there are patient records that can't be released, that kind of thing. And I think it's the case, Stephanie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 10% of the archive of a particular collection can be digitized in the case of the Purdue University libraries. And so that sometimes a collection can be one folder, and in that case, it can be tricky, and other times a collection is gigantic, and 10%, you're never really going to get there. But in any case, what we do at Porta Sophia when we get an archival source is really curate that reference so that it is searchable, even if we can't actually reproduce it and digitize it, right? And so just to give a sense of where we're headed also on the horizon in terms of curating additional archival sources, I've done a couple of trips myself, like Luke was mentioning. So I was at the Betsy Gordon Psychoactive Substances Collection, in the fall with Stephanie, working in a variety of different collections there. And then also this winter, I was in the Timothy Leary papers at the New York Public Library. So we're in the process of kind of curating some additional archival sources from those. And then hopefully through the Archival Researcher Network, again, our goal is really to make our database really more inclusive of key archival sources in the history of psychedelics. So yeah, hopefully that gives a sense of where we're at currently. And then let's see. And then I have some slides of, again, those screenshots of how some of these sources look on our site. But do you want to maybe, Luke, talk a little bit about what you did to populate those in the beginning days of Porta Sophia?
Yes, the beginning days. Sure.
Story time.
Yeah. It was fairly straightforward. I mean, I guess I want to pull back the curtain a little bit and tell you that this is not necessarily outside the realm of possible for you if you're not a trained historian or trained archivist. So what I did was I started contributing to Porta Sophia with certain patents and targets in mind. So the team then was sort of focusing on certain key patents, and I'm not going to name those now, but I had a really large cache of records that I had collected while researching the books that I've written. So Amanda talked about my CV and these books that I've written, and so in writing these, I had gone to various different archives in Glasgow, Scotland, in Edinburgh, Scotland, in London. I had been I'd also gone to the Purdue collection, and I had been at a variety of other archives across the United States and Canada. And so with those sort of records in my computer, and with the list of targets and with the different patents in mind, I basically started trawling through some of my records on evenings and weekends. And so I just started rereading some of these documents. And all the while I was keeping the targets in mind. I was keeping these key words in mind. And so to give you a concrete example, I took some of the key words that were associated with patents having to do with cancer, with music, with addiction and polysubstance use. So these are some of the key words that I was just really keeping in the front of my mind. And so I focused, then I focused in even more on the music. So I definitely recalled reading that researchers were using music, Chopin, Tchaikovsky, Beethoven. This just stuck out to me when I was reading the historical documents. And so this is during end-of-life therapies. And so I took these historical documents that I had, and I highlighted the relevant areas, these relevant areas that aligned with the keywords and the targets. And then I simply communicated this to the Porta Sophia team. So there's the target, there's the keyword, and then they aligned with what I was reading in these historical documents. So it's very simple when you think about it this way, I think. So that was just a concrete example, Amanda, for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of them turned out to be useful prior art for us, for sure. So Cece, if you want to share again, I can talk through the different screen grabs that I pulled off of our website search engine. So this first one, here, let me maximize my screen here so I can see. This first is an example of if you're using the global search and you type in cancer and LSD, which is a target that we have seen come up over and over again in our patent database of something that people are trying to patent around, you know, cancer as an indication using psychedelics. This pulls up one of the archival sources, which is a letter that was in the, I believe this was the, here, if you want to go to the next slide, let's see. Yes, the Stephen Hancock papers. And so this is the same example, but just pulling it up through the targeted site search, like I mentioned, where you kind of select a compound and select a subtheme, again, LSD and cancer. And then you can see the curated reference here where Luke has actually pulled out the quotes that are relevant from this letter so that a patent examiner could see, okay, there is this letter from 1969, right? And it's talking about this sort of improved mood and acceptance of impending death after 2 LSD sessions, right? Okay, and then I think we have one more example. And this is from the Charles Savage papers, also engaging with Dr. Pankey. I think that's how you say that. Apologies if that's not right. Stephanie probably knows. And so again, this is patient materials, again, correspondence. And if you go to the next slide, this is the global search, and then this is about LSD and addiction. And so 2 former patients struggling with alcoholism were readmitted for additional LSD treatment under Dr. Pankey. And then there's like a, you know, the curated reference there that gives a little bit more specific information that would be relevant for the patent examiner. And I think on the next slide, I have, just so you have a sense of it, what this might look like in terms of what targets are. And so you can see, like, we've got, we're kind of still figuring out what the final version will look like that we send out to the Archival Researcher Network, but this is kind of our beta version where we have patents that you can actually click on that are linked, and you can see the whole thing, the title, and all the glory of all the different claims and subclaims. But we also have the priority date, which is really important because you want to find sources that are prior to that, right? Prior art. So anything before August 5th of 2020 for this first one. And then some really basic keywords. So DMT, intravenous delivery, psychedelic state, and then a little bit more of a little bit more context without the legal language from the claims themselves. So that's just a taste of what these various targets could look like. And I think that's everything, right, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, what's really interesting is people who have multiple languages, and so being able to identify prior art in beyond the United States, beyond Canada, and beyond the English language. So I guess I just wanted to underline that before I forgot.
Yeah, for sure. And so thank you so much, Luke, for that kind of primer on psychedelic archival research. And I will be kind of sending out the recording and suggested readings and resources to everyone who has registered. And at this point, we can open up to questions. And Cece, you can take the screen share away. And I see Nancy. Hi, Nancy. All clinical or preclinical too? Can you, Nancy, if you want to unmute, you can ask the question. I'm not quite sure I understand the context there. Apologies.
That's okay. I can ask. Hi. So
Hi.
I'm wondering, I wasn't really planning to be on camera, so pardon
Sorry.
the look. Well, are the studies, so in my world, there's this sort of exploration that's at the level of the molecule. And then there's also preclinical, meaning, studies in rats and Siamese fighting fish and et cetera. So do you have, so most of your examples have been clinical, and I'm wondering whether you also have entered into the database sort of targets that are more preclinical or, medicinal chemistry, other things like that.
I wonder if
Sure,
that's a
I can.
Tom question.
Yeah, I was going to say I can take a stab at it, and Cece and Tom, you should also chime in if necessary, or if you have thoughts. So Nancy, our patent database that we are kind of directly pulling targets from, or our database of targets is directly pulled from current patents, right? And specifically patents that we have put through a process of evaluation that are threatening to the psychedelic space, like closing off access to potential therapeutics and that kind of thing. And so I think it's the case that most of those patents are in that more like human application space, but I think there probably is some other technologies that people are trying to patent here that are in our database, but I don't know about any examples off the top of my head. I don't know if Cece or Tom, if you have thoughts.
So those are definitely relevant, and it largely depends on what the patent applicant is trying to claim. For instance, if somebody was trying to claim a deuterated LSD, relevant prior art would be something that showed the LSD molecule and the sort of general knowledge that deuterating a compound makes it more metabolically attractive. So in that instance, it would be non-clinical because they were just trying to go after molecules themselves. As far as drugs for treating humans, there is definitely a relevant prior art from animal studies with sort of the link is what would be predictable extending mouse model to a human. So mouse studies are definitely relevant, or other model organisms where there's scientifically backed predictable way to connect the dots between the two.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that, Tom. And great question, Nancy. Other questions? Got just a couple minutes left.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, so I have another one. So do you have all of the work that was publicly funded? And I'm thinking about the work at the narcotic farm. Most of that was published. But then, some of it wasn't. Do you have all those studies like already dealt with and already kind of archived and databased? Yeah, that's the question. And so what I'm thinking about is connecting the dots, of course, in my own head and work, but also connecting the dots between the work that was done in the 50s and what you're seeing today, because I would imagine that you get a lot of, I'm the defensive maneuver here, right, to show how much of this work has been done in the past. That's an important thing. So yeah, is the publicly funded work already in the database, or is it still yet to be entered?
I can speak to this. To my knowledge, it is not. And so, like I said, that 25 initial sources is primarily from a few different collections that I don't think is inclusive of what you're talking about, Nancy. And so, and the rest of the sources in our database are really directly linked to various patents that were at the top of our, tier 1 priority list. And so most of that we knocked out using non-archival sources, right? but I think they're like, that's a great example of a gap that you could potentially, you know, fill for sure with the Archival Researcher Network, and especially like thinking about what kind of patent targets would be relevant there would be something I'd love to talk to you about. So cool, awesome,
Brilliant.
thank you.
That's a victory right there, having one of
Yay.
the world's leading experts on the narcotic farm and the LSD and other psychedelic tests that went on there involved.
Yay. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording since we're at time here. And I again want to be respectful of people's time. So if you have to go, that's totally fine. If people want to stick around a little bit and once the recording is stopped and talk a little bit more, that's great too. So I'll stop.